I shouldn't have been surprised when my mother's voice cracked over the phone, not with that specific rehearsed warning. Liam, she'd said, don't come home for Thanksgiving. We're not celebrating anything this year. Just a short, cold call followed by my father's quick, nervous agreement. I knew immediately it was a lie, a cover for something they were actively trying to hide. My name is Liam O'Connell. I'm 36, and I spent the last 15 years being the safety net, the emergency fund, the cosigner, the personal ATM for a family that clearly valued my wallet more than my presence. I live 3 hours away from the town of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but I've always been on call. I covered the mortgage shortfall for my brother Ethan when he lost his job. I paid the annual tuition for my sister Chloe's graduate studies. I even bought my parents' new sedan. I was dependable. I was the fool. I drove anyway. Not because I was craving a dry turkey, but because I needed to see what was so vital they had to ban me from my own family property. I needed proof that my intuition, that tight, cold knot in my stomach, wasn't just paranoia. When I reached the long driveway, the automatic gate was closed. I called the house several times. No answer. Then a single text message flashed on my screen from Chloe. We're not celebrating anything. Do not call again. The gate remained shut. I sat there for one silent, furious minute looking at the house where I'd grown up now guarded against me. I didn't knock. I didn't plead. I just turned my car around. It was funny how clarity arrived not with a bang, but with a simple locked gate. By the time I hit the highway, my hands were steady, but my mind was moving fast. I didn't rage. I opened my banking app, and I started scrolling through every recurring payment I made for them. Every single one. Canceled. If you've ever been the silent strength for a family that pushed you out, hit that subscribe button. You're not alone. Stick around to see how I finally took back my life and what happened when my family realized their ATM was officially closed. The cold reply I'd given Chloe had been building for years. The feeling of being indispensable yet unwanted, it was a deep ache that only the O'Connell family could inflict. They didn't see me, Liam O'Connell, the 36-year-old software engineer living in Philadelphia who spent 80-hour weeks consulting with tech giants. They saw a resource, a high-interest savings account with a personal touch. My designation as the ATM started subtly right after college. My father, Thomas, a good man but emotionally weak, had lost his job at the local printing plant, and the family finances had taken a critical hit. Dad used to say, "Real family shows up." I took that to heart. I started small, a few $100s for Mom's new washing machine, chipping in for my brother Ethan's community college books. It felt good then. It felt like I was holding the pieces together just as Dad would have wanted. But the requests grew larger and the gratitude grew smaller. Ethan was the middle child, a perpetual dreamer who floated between dead-end jobs and community college degrees he never finished. When he decided to drop out for the third time and move in with his longtime girlfriend, the rent was suddenly an issue. He didn't ask Mom, Eleanor called me. She used her soft, weary voice, the one designed to produce maximum guilt. "He's trying, sweetheart, but the landlord is ruthless." "Just $1,200 to cover the deposit and first month. We'll pay you back." We never did, and soon enough, I was quietly covering his electric and gas bills, forwarding money directly to the utility companies so he wouldn't be cut off. It was less about helping Ethan and more about preventing Mom's stress. Then there was Chloe, my younger sister, the golden child. She wasn't subtle like Ethan, she was calculating. She announced she was leaving her stable but boring marketing job to pursue a master's degree in business development. The tuition for the private university was exorbitant, around $22,000 a year. She presented it not as a request, but as an investment in her future, an investment that would surely benefit the whole family someday. My parents, blinded by her ambition, couldn't say no. I was the one who paid the first semester, writing a check for $11,000. I was the one who had to agree to co-sign the student loan for the remaining years. I did it because they all made me feel like stopping Chloe's future was tantamount to betraying our father's memory. The financial bleed was constant, but the emotional cost was higher. When I did manage to drive down for a planned visit, I was usually met with an awkward transactional energy. If the visit wasn't tied to a financial crisis, it felt like an obligation. I remember 2 years ago, I had saved up and bought my dad the high-end carpentry equipment he'd always wanted, a gift worth nearly $5,000. It was his passion, and he hadn't touched it since his layoff. He opened the box, looked at the expensive tools, and I waited for the hug, the appreciation. Instead, he just looked down and mumbled, "Very generous, Liam. But we have bills, son. Did you look at the heating oil quote I sent Mom last week?" It was a cold slap. My effort, my sacrifice wasn't seen as love. It was seen as poorly allocated funds that should have gone toward another emergency. That was the moment I realized they weren't grateful. They were simply used to it. I was a fixture, like the house's faulty wiring, necessary to maintain the structure but never admired. The worst part, they rarely asked me about my life, my job, or my significant financial successes. When I got my promotion and a huge bonus last year, I told Mom over the phone. She only paused to ask, "That's wonderful, dear. Does that mean you can finally help with the property tax issue? It's gone up again." I was a successful professional with a demanding career and a rising net worth, but to the O'Connells, I was only defined by my capacity to fix their problems. I had tried to pull back gently before. I'd offered to find financial advisors for Ethan and Chloe. I'd suggested budgeting software. Every attempt was met with resistance, drama, and Eleanor's signature guilt trips. They wanted the fix, not the lesson. But the locked gate on Thanksgiving weekend was different. It wasn't an oversight. It was an active, unified decision to keep me out. It wasn't about avoiding celebration. It was about hiding a crucial truth. That simple, arrogant text from Chloe, "We're not celebrating anything. Do not call again," snapped the last thread of obligation. My immediate reaction to cancel every single financial commitment wasn't rage. It was finally chillingly about self-preservation. I wasn't going to let them weaponize my dependable nature anymore. I had to know what they were hiding, and the only way to get answers was to stop paying for their silence. The immediate silence that followed the cancellation of all financial lifelines was deafening. No frantic texts, no panicked calls from Ethan about the overdue electricity bill. Nothing. It was the most ominous quiet I had experienced in years. Normally, cutting off a fraction of their aid would trigger a full-scale family emergency, complete with Mom's stressed-out calls. This time, however, they were focused elsewhere. They were preoccupied with whatever they were hiding. 2 days after I turned back from the gate, the first break in the silence came, not a desperate plea, but a strange formal message from Chloe. It was sent to our old, rarely used family group chat. "Hey, Liam, Mark and I are doing some long-term planning. We need access to the old storage unit paperwork. Do you still have Dad's safe key? Urgent." Mark, that's Travis Black, Chloe's husband, a slick former used car salesman who thought he was a high roller in residential real estate. Travis was the kind of guy who saw family relationships purely as leverage. He was never the brains, but he was certainly the engine of whatever scheme Chloe cooked up. The storage unit paperwork was a weak cover story. Dad never kept anything important in storage. All the important documents, deeds, wills, insurance policies were locked in the small floor safe in his old office closet. Why did they need Dad's safe key now? I didn't reply to Chloe. Instead, I started digging. I went back through my old bank statements and personal emails, checking every transaction related to the family property in the last 18 months. I realized then that the O'Connell family home wasn't just a simple suburban house. My grandparents had left my parents a fairly large 10-acre parcel of land in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a semi-rural area that was just beginning to be attractive to developers due to its proximity to the new highway interchange. The house sat on 1 acre, and the remaining 9 acres were mostly undeveloped woods. I recalled a small, vague conversation from the previous summer where Mom had mentioned some zoning issue, and Dad had quickly changed the subject. I pulled up the public records for the O'Connell property. That's when the first wave of genuine nausea hit me. 9 months ago, my parents had quietly executed a lot split separating the 9 undeveloped acres from the main residential acre. And 2 months after that, the 9-acre lot had been sold. The buyer wasn't listed under a family name. It was an LLC Blackthorn Acquisitions. The name Blackthorn Acquisitions meant nothing to me until I cross-referenced the property's legal filings with corporate records. The sole managing member of Blackthorn Acquisitions was Travis Black. This was the unsung deal. This was what they had been hiding. They hadn't just sold the land. They had sold it to Chloe's husband, likely for far below market value, or perhaps they hadn't been paid in full at all. Travis was the realtor, the buyer, and the beneficiary. This wasn't financial help. This was exploitation. They were leveraging the family's legacy, the land my grandfather had worked for, to fuel Chloe and Travis's murky real estate ambitions, or more likely to cover a mountain of debt. I remembered the recent conversations, the aggressive push from Chloe for me to co-sign her business loans that were supposed to fund her master's degree. Loans that I now suspected were rerouted to keep Travis's sinking ventures afloat. And my parents, Thomas and Eleanor, must have known this was shady, yet they let it happen. It explained everything. Mom's strained voice on the phone, the urgent need for Dad's safe key to access documents, the reason they had to ban me from coming home. They were closing a loop, finalizing paperwork on the land deal, and they knew my arrival would expose the entire scam. The anger was clean, cold, and focused. It wasn't the blind fury of betrayal. It was the strategic rage of a man realizing he was dealing with criminals wearing family faces. I wasn't going back to beg for an explanation. I was going back for evidence. I spent the next 48 hours compiling a file. I called my lawyer contact, Anya Petrova, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney I'd worked with on a difficult contract review. I told her the basic outline: co-signed student loans, sudden land sale to a family member's LLC, and suspicious urgency for old documents. Anya advised me to get eyes on the current situation immediately. Specifically, she told me to look for any documents transferring power of attorney or further selling off assets. I packed light. This time, I didn't load the trunk with expensive gifts or cherry pies. I packed my laptop, my external hard drive, and a very small, high-quality audio recorder. I knew the O'Connell home better than anyone. I knew where the safe was, where the emergency key was hidden, and where the old home security system recorder was located. I knew the house's secrets because I had spent my life fixing them. The 3-hour drive back to Bethlehem was nothing like the frantic, snow-covered journey on Thanksgiving. The roads were clear, the sky was a neutral gray, but the internal landscape was radically different. I was no longer the desperate son seeking validation. I was an investigator returning to the scene of a crime. I wasn't looking for a seat at the table. I was coming to dismantle the table entirely. I was determined to prove that the Blackthorn Acquisitions deal was not just a conflict of interest, but a deeply illegal maneuver that had coerced my aging parents into jeopardizing their last remaining wealth. I knew if I waited, Chloe and Travis would complete the transfer, liquidate the money, and leave my parents with nothing but regret and debt. I was 3 miles from the O'Connell estate when I pulled over, took a deep breath, and sent a one-word text to Anya: in. I arrived in Bethlehem just after dusk, choosing a Tuesday evening when Chloe and Travis would likely be less guarded than on a weekend. I didn't drive directly to the house. I parked my SUV 2 blocks away in the small lot of the abandoned hardware store, the same store Dad used to drag me to every Saturday. From there, I walked, utilizing the winding, tree-lined streets of the neighborhood, a route I knew intimately from years of running track in high school. The O'Connell house sat at the end of a long, slightly elevated driveway. The automatic gate still closed, and mocking was the only thing standing between the street and the house. I approached cautiously, hiding behind the enormous oak tree that marked the boundary of the lot they had just sold to Blackthorn Acquisitions. The scene was unsettlingly normal, yet subtly wrong. The house lights were on, casting a warm, deceptive glow. There were two cars parked outside the gate, my parents' sedan, and a brand new, oversized black pickup truck. The truck didn't belong to anyone in the family. It screamed contractor, or more accurately, shady real estate buyer. I pulled out my phone and used the high-powered zoom to scan the interior. Through the large living room window, I saw my mother Eleanor sitting stiffly on the sofa. She wasn't knitting or watching TV. She was simply sitting, hands clasped tightly, looking utterly miserable. My father Thomas stood near the fireplace, avoiding her eyes. They looked like hostages in their own home. Then the figures of the conspirators appeared. Chloe, dressed sharply in a tailored blazer, stood by the massive antique dining table, which was now covered not with Thanksgiving dishes, but with stacks of legal-sized papers. Across from her sat Travis Black, wearing an infuriatingly smug expression, and that new pickup truck was clearly his. And there was a fourth person, a stiff older man in a cheap suit holding a briefcase. This was likely the settlement agent or notary, the final piece in their dirty puzzle. This wasn't just a casual family meeting. This was the final closing. They were doing it right there in the sanctity of my childhood home, without me, the primary financial backer, present. And they weren't just closing the sale of the land. They were likely trying to strong-arm my parents into signing off on something even more catastrophic, perhaps the full power of attorney, or even the deed to the remaining house acre. I watched, holding my breath, as Chloe pointed emphatically at a line on one of the documents. Mom flinched slightly and looked toward Dad, a silent plea for rescue. Dad looked at the floor and shifted his weight. That one non-action from my father, the man who taught me about integrity, hurt more than the closed gate. It was the confirmation that he was a willing, albeit terrified, participant in the deception. Chloe then moved to the entryway, clearly heading to the gate. I quickly ducked behind the oak tree. My heart hammered, not from fear but from the raw, desperate need to capture the evidence. I heard the distinct, faint whirring sound of the automatic gate activating. It was opening just enough for the older man in the suit to step out. As the gate slowly hissed open, I heard the faint echo of their voices. "The wire transfer is confirmed, Travis." The agent said, his voice clipped and professional. "We're all set." Travis chuckled, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Told you it'd be clean, just needed them to sign the final release. No mess, no fuss." "You did a great job handling your in-laws," the agent replied, gathering his papers. "Not every client is that cooperative." "Cooperative?" Chloe's voice was sharper, colder. "They were terrified. We just reminded them what happens if their golden boy Liam ever finds out about the tax issues we helped them with. Fear is cheaper than a lawsuit, right?" The agent laughed thinly and got into his sedan. As he drove past, I stayed frozen behind the tree trunk, my blood turning to ice. They were terrified. They had used fear against my parents, threatening them with financial ruin, likely leveraging some minor past mistake to ensure their silence and cooperation. The gate began to close. I knew I couldn't approach now, but I had to know what document they had just signed. Just as the gate was about to lock, I saw Chloe standing there, one hand on the control panel, watching the agent drive away. She looked directly at the spot where I was hiding, a predatory smile on her face. For a chilling moment, I thought she had seen me, but she was just admiring her handiwork. She then pulled out her phone and sent a text, likely to Travis, who was still inside. She didn't look back at the house or at her parents, who were still sitting defeated inside. She simply turned and swaggered back into the house, locking the world and me out. I waited 5 more minutes until the darkness was complete. Then I crept forward, slipping a small, flat micro camera into the dense shrubbery near the house before retreating. I knew the layout. I knew the routine. They had just completed a major transaction, but the truly damning evidence was still inside. I needed those documents, and I needed to know exactly what threat Chloe and Travis had used to silence my father. My role as the dependable son was over. Now I was a ghost, returning for what was rightfully mine. I drove back to Philadelphia that night not with the empty feeling of betrayal nhung voi mot su tap trung munch liet. The small micro camera was transmitting data to my phone. I didn't need to watch the whole footage. The 10-minute segment of Chloe and Travis sealing the deal and discussing the tactics of fear was enough. Fear is cheaper than a lawsuit. That sentence was the key. What minor financial mistake had my parents made in the past that Chloe and Travis could weaponize? It had to be significant enough to warrant my father's nervous silence and my mother's terrified compliance. I scheduled an urgent call with Anya Petrova the next morning. I gave her the details: the lot split, the sale to Blackthorn Acquisitions Travis's LLC, the use of fear to coerce my parents, and the audio evidence. Anya was methodical. Liam selling land to a family member's LLC is ethically murky, but not illegal by itself. The coercion and the tax issues they mentioned, that's where the fraud lies. We need to know what tax issue they used as leverage, and we need the signed sale documents, especially the closing statement, and any power of attorney POA forms. If we can prove fraud, the entire sale can be voided, and Blackthorn Acquisitions will be liable for damages. I told her about Dad's safe and the urgent request for the key. The safe is our first target, I concluded. Just as I hung up with Anya, my phone rang. It wasn't Mom or Chloe. It was Ethan O'Connell, my brother. His number had been silent since I canceled his utilities. I knew this was not a social call. "Hey, dude." Ethan began, his voice whiny and laced with forced casualness. "Long time. I was just calling to check in, see how work is." "Work is great," I replied, my voice flat. "But I know why you called. The electricity is off, isn't it?" Ethan sputtered. Well, yeah. It's complicated. I was waiting for the new contract money." "Ethan." I cut him off. "Let's be direct. I'm not sending money. I drove down to Bethlehem earlier this week." What were Mom and Dad hiding? The question hit him like a physical blow. He fell silent, then sighed heavily. "Liam, look, I didn't want any part of this. Chloe and Travis, they're monsters, but they threatened to expose Dad." "Expose what?" I pressed my recorder running. "The estate tax loophole." Ethan whispered, his voice dropping low. "When Grandpa passed away 15 years ago, Dad and Grandpa Thomas Sr. had set up a complicated trust to avoid massive estate taxes on the land. They declared the 9 acres as agricultural use property, with a restrictive covenant that mandated it must be used for farming for at least 20 years. If they sold it commercially before that 20-year mark, which they just did, they owe the state a huge retroactive tax penalty plus interest and fines. We're talking 6 figures, maybe more. It would wipe them out." My mind raced. This was the leverage. This was the fear they were using. "And Chloe and Travis know this?" I asked. "They didn't just know it, Liam." Travis found the loophole. He told Mom and Dad that he could make the whole problem disappear by selling the land to his LLC Blackthorn Acquisitions. He claimed that because he was a legitimate developer, he could smooth over the zoning and pay the penalty in small installments through the company. But Mom and Dad had to sign over everything and keep it a secret from you. "Why me?" "Because you're the one person who could afford the tax bill outright," Ethan admitted shamefully. "They knew you would write the check, but then they wouldn't get the cash from the sale. Chloe convinced Mom that if you paid the fine, you'd own them forever. This way, they get out of the tax debt and get a quick cash payout, or so they thought. Chloe told them she was planning to use the cash to pay off Mom's mortgage, but I know she and Travis are in deep debt with some serious people. They need that money to flee." "Flee?" "Yeah. I overheard Travis talking to Chloe last week. Something about moving the money offshore to the Cayman Islands as soon as the closing finalized. They're planning to leave the country with the money and dump the tax liability back onto Mom and Dad, potentially forcing the sale of the house to cover the fines and mortgages. Chloe said the house would have to be sold anyway to cover her master's loan, the one you co-signed." The sheer calculated cruelty of the plan was staggering. They were using my parents' fear of an old tax penalty to steal their only remaining assets, saddle them with legal debt, and then escape the country, leaving me to deal with the fallout of the co-signed student loan. Ethan, did Mom and Dad ever sign a full power of attorney? I asked, my voice deadly calm. I I think so, Ethan stammered. A few months ago. Chloe said it was for convenience, so she could manage Mom's bills while she was traveling for her degree. But I saw Dad sign it, and he looked sick. This confirmed Anya's worst fear. If Chloe had the POA, she didn't need my parents' cooperation anymore. She could sell the remaining houseacre, empty their accounts, and finalize her escape all legally. The small window of time I had was closing rapidly. Stay silent, Ethan, I instructed. Don't warn them, I know. If you tell them, you're confirming your role in this mess. I hung up, the small, shaky voice of my brother replaced by the chilling realization Chloe and Travis weren't just exploiting the family. They were planning a complete financial and physical desertion, using my dependable nature as a safety shield on their way out. The safe containing Dad's key and the trust documents was no longer a target. It was an absolute necessity. I had to get inside that house tonight. The cold clarity from the previous night had solidified into an urgent surgical mission. I couldn't wait for a formal search warrant. By the time the legal system caught up, Chloe and Travis would be on a flight with the O'Connell family legacy. I knew my parents went to bed early, and my brother Ethan was too far away and too useless to intervene. I drove back to Bethlehem again, arriving at 1:30 a.m. I parked far from the house and approached on foot, moving through the recently sold 9-acre property that now felt hostile and alien. The house was completely dark. I bypassed the automatic gate easily. The external manual override box had always been faulty. I was inside the perimeter in less than 30 seconds. I didn't use the front door. The emergency key for the garage side entrance was, as always, taped under the clay pot by the rose bushes, exactly where Dad had told me it would be 20 years ago. The silence inside the house was intense, broken only by the heavy, rhythmic breathing from my parents' bedroom upstairs. I moved silently through the familiar darkened living room, past the dining table where the illegal closing had taken place just hours before. The paper remnants were gone, but the atmosphere of betrayal lingered. My target was Dad's small office closet on the ground floor. Inside, behind a stack of old accounting ledgers, was the floor safe. I knew the combination. It was Dad's birthday, a number that had never changed. 0712. The heavy door of the safe swung open with a soft metallic scrape. Inside, arranged neatly, were the artifacts of the O'Connell family's history. Dad's military discharge papers, the original deed to the 10-acre plot, Mom's jewelry, and the documents I needed. I pulled out the two most critical folders, the original Thomas O'Connell Sr. Trust documents detailing the 20-year restrictive covenant for agricultural use to avoid the massive estate tax penalty, and the stack of recent legal paperwork. The recent stack contained the signed power of attorney POA document dated 4 months prior. The signature lines for Thomas and Eleanor O'Connell were clean, but their trembling style was unmistakable signatures signed under duress. Worse, the POA was general, durable, and immediate, granting Chloe and Travis complete unchecked control over all their financial and legal decisions. This meant they could now sell the house without further consent. Next was the closing statement for the 9-acre lot sale to Blackthorn Acquisitions. The sale price was obscenely low, roughly 30% of the actual market value. The funds were listed to be wired to a joint account under Chloe and Travis Black. My parents had received almost nothing directly. The final damning document was the quitclaim deed for the 9 acres. This document required both Thomas and Eleanor O'Connell to sign, transferring the property to Travis's LLC. My mother's signature looked authentic, forced, but real. My father's signature, however, was too smooth, too perfect. It lacked the tremor and hesitation that had marked the POA signature. I immediately photographed every document, the original trust, the POA, and the forged quitclaim deed with multiple high-resolution shots. I placed everything back exactly as I found it, closed the safe, and silently left the house, the key back under the clay pot. I didn't try to confront them. The time for emotion was over. This was a legal war. By 6:00 a.m., I was back in Philadelphia emailing the encrypted files to Anya Petrova. She called me back 10 minutes later. "Liam, you are incredible," she said, her voice tight with professional excitement. "The audio recording of Chloe is clear. Fear is cheaper than a lawsuit that proves coercion. But this quitclaim deed—" "Is it forged?" I asked. "I can't say definitively without a handwriting expert, but based on the discrepancy with the POA and the nature of this document, it looks suspicious. This forgery is the linchpin. A POA gives Chloe power over them, but faking their signature on the actual deed is outright criminal fraud. More importantly, this original trust document, the one that requires the land to stay agricultural for 20 years, is a covenant running with the land." Anya explained that this covenant meant the agricultural restriction was tied to the land itself, not just the owner. Any sale that violated the covenant was a breach of the original trust terms, instantly triggering the massive six-figure retroactive estate tax penalty. Travis sold the land to his LLC knowing he would violate this covenant, Anya concluded. He thought he was being clever, absorbing the liability into his LLC, but he's exposed himself completely. We can file an emergency injunction to void the sale based on the POA duress and the likely forgery, but we can also use the trust to force the state to immediately audit the sale. That will freeze all of Blackthorn Acquisition's assets, including the money they just wired. The money they plan to take offshore, I added. Exactly. We're not just suing Chloe and Travis, Liam. We're sicking the state tax authority on them. They won't be fleeing anywhere. This is a game changer. I sat back, the exhaustion finally hitting me, but the satisfaction was deeper. I had the truth. They had leveraged their parents' fear and the family's assets. Now I was leveraging their greed and their amateur attempt at criminal fraud. The dependable son was gone. The executioner had arrived. Anya moved fast. Within 24 hours, she had filed the emergency injunction against Blackthorn Acquisition, citing fraudulent conveyance and coercion concerning the POA. Crucially, she also submitted the evidence of the original trust document and notified the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue regarding the immediate breach of the agricultural use covenant. The state tax audit was now a certainty. The transaction was frozen, the money wired to Blackthorn's accounts was inaccessible, and the tax clock was ticking furiously against Chloe and Travis. Now came the final piece, the confrontation. I didn't want the spectacle in court. I wanted the truth to break them in private. I sent a text to the family group chat, something I hadn't done since the cold reply. "I will be home tomorrow at 5 p.m. We need an urgent family meeting to discuss the immediate financial crisis regarding the property." The bait was set. By mentioning a financial crisis, I knew Chloe and Travis would assume I was simply scared and was coming back to offer a bailout. They would come prepared to gaslight me, to bully my parents into maintaining the lie, and to demand that I mind my own business and handle my own debts, referring to the co-signed student loan I was still liable for. They arrived 10 minutes late, Chloe and Travis walking in with synchronized arrogance. Dad and Mom were already sitting stiffly in the living room, their faces pale. Ethan, who I had explicitly asked to stay home, was also there, hovering awkwardly by the kitchen doorway, a nervous spectator and my potential, albeit weak witness. "Well, well, well," Travis drawled, leaning against the doorway. He looked relaxed, almost bored. "Look who decided to show up after the feast. What's this urgent crisis, Liam? Did your big city consulting firm finally realize you were overpaid?" Chloe smiled thinly. "Liam, we told you Mom and Dad handled the property sale. It's done. You were kept out of it because you don't live here. And frankly, you wouldn't understand the specifics." I remained standing, not taking a seat. I looked directly at my father, Thomas O'Connell. "Dad, I need you to be honest with me just once. Did you and Mom voluntarily sell the 9 acres to Travis's company Blackthorn Acquisitions knowing it would trigger the estate tax penalty? Dad looked at the ground. Mom started to cry, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. Chloe stepped forward, her voice rising to a sharp, defensive pitch. He doesn't have to answer you, Liam. This is harassing them. They signed everything legally. I ignored Chloe completely. My eyes locked on Dad. Did you sign the power of attorney because Chloe and Travis told you they would expose the tax liability, wipe out your savings, and force the sale of the house if you didn't comply? The silence was crushing. Dad's jaw worked. He looked at Mom, then at the floor, then finally, shamefully, at me. Yes, Liam, he choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. We were terrified. They found the mistake. We thought this was the only way to save the house. Chloe exploded. You fool, you weak old man. We agreed you wouldn't tell him anything. Travis, realizing the game had shifted, tried to intervene. This is ridiculous, Thomas. You're confused. Chloe, let's go. We don't have to listen to this drama. Stay put, Travis. I said, my voice cutting through his bluff. I was calm, which unnerved them more than yelling ever could. Because the crisis you're facing is much bigger than a POA signed under duress. I pulled out the official document from Anya's firm, a simple dry notice from the Department of Revenue. I slid it across the coffee table toward them. This is a notification from the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue. I explained, watching Chloe's eyes widen as she read the letterhead. It confirms that the sale of the 9 acres has been flagged for violating the original Thomas O'Connell Sr. Trust. That violation immediately triggers the full retroactive estate tax liability. Since Blackthorn Acquisitions is the new owner, the state is going after your company, Travis. The fine starts at over $700,000. Travis grabbed the letter, his face losing all color. No, that's impossible. We factored that in. We had an arrangement. You had a handshake arrangement built on fraud and intimidation, I corrected. You tried to scare your in-laws into compliance, but you forgot one thing. I am the co-signer on Chloe's student loan. I'm the one paying for your parents' health care, and I am the one who always kept their private safe combination. I accessed the original trust documents, and I worked with my attorney to ensure that your little acquisitions company is now liable for the entire state tax penalty. You ruined us, Chloe whispered, her eyes shining with pure hatred. You ruined yourselves, I stated. The injunction is already filed. The sale is void. Your wired funds are frozen for a federal investigation into tax fraud and possible forgery. I pointed at Dad. That signature on the quitclaim deed, Anya's expert is already reviewing the discrepancy. If it's a forgery, Travis, you're facing criminal charges, not just civil liability. And Chloe, you're complicit. Ethan quietly slipped out of the room, unable to handle the intensity. My mother, Eleanor, began to sob, but this time the sobs were laced with relief. Travis threw the paper down, his arrogance dissolving into panic. You think you've won. You think you're going to keep this family together. You still have the co-signed loan. Liam, we're debt-free. You're not. I smiled, a genuine cold smile that was unlike anything they had ever seen. That brings me to the final item on the agenda, the co-signed loan. I am filing the paperwork tomorrow to declare myself an involuntary creditor. I'm taking the collateral you leveraged with that loan, the title to the apartment building Chloe secretly bought with the money I thought was for her master's degree. Once I seize that, I'm cleared of the debt. And you two, you're left with $700,000 in tax liability, a pending forgery investigation, and a one-way ticket to federal court. I looked at my parents, who were staring at me, their savior and executioner. I came back to save the land and undo the damage. I've done that. Now I'm leaving. Permanently. I didn't wait for a response from Chloe or Travis. Their faces, the shock, the fear, the sudden complete obliteration of their carefully constructed scheme were the only closure I needed. I walked out, leaving my parents staring into the ruins of the loyalty they had chosen to discard. The final legal maneuvers over the next 2 months were clinical and swift, thanks to Anya's precision. The financial fallout for Chloe and Travis was absolute. Because Travis Black's LLC Blackthorn Acquisitions was the registered buyer who breached the trust covenant, the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue immediately issued a notice of deficiency for over $700,000 in retroactive estate taxes, plus severe penalties and interest. Since the LLC was a shell company with minimal assets outside of the frozen transfer, the liability quickly fell directly upon Travis and Chloe as the managing members. As promised, I filed paperwork and presented the evidence of the apartment building Chloe had secretly purchased. That property intended to be their nest egg was seized as collateral to clear my obligation on the co-signed student loan. I was free of the debt. They were left with the remaining balance, the destroyed credit score from the initial loan defaults, and no equity. The investigation into the likely forgery on the quitclaim deed proceeded with Anya ensuring the district attorney was fully aware of the elder coercion tactics. The threat of criminal prosecution ensured that Chloe and Travis could not simply vanish. They lost everything. The money from the land sale remained frozen, eaten away by legal fees and penalties. They were forced to sell their own house quickly, taking a massive loss simply to avoid deeper debt. The final word I heard was that they had relocated to a small, isolated town in Florida. Their high roller dreams crushed, their reputations in the industry ruined, and their credit ratings destroyed. My relationship with my parents, Thomas and Eleanor, was not saved. I had saved their house and their financial future, but I had permanently broken the trust that had allowed me to be exploited for so long. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Mom called. She wasn't begging for money or justifying Chloe. She was simply grieving. "We lost you, Liam," she whispered. "We were afraid of the money, but we didn't think about losing you." "You didn't lose me, Mom," I replied gently. "You excluded me. You made me the last priority, and you let fear guide you to criminals instead of relying on the only person who always showed up. I fixed the problem, but I can't fix the principle." Dad, racked with guilt, eventually wrote me a short letter. He apologized for his weakness and for betraying the values he had taught me. He offered me the deed to the entire remaining property. I thanked him, but I declined. I advised them to sell the large family home and purchase a smaller, more manageable house. Outright, one free of debt and the ghosts of betrayal. They took my advice. They moved out of the O'Connell estate and into a small condo 60 miles away, closing the chapter entirely. I never spoke to Ethan again. I changed my phone number, my email address, and slowly dissolved all remaining ties to the O'Connell name and their constant crises. It hurt. Yes. It was a profound, agonizing grief, the death of the family I thought I had. But it wasn't the pain of being abandoned. It was the sharp, clean pain of a surgical cut necessary for survival. I was no longer the dependable son, the fixer, or the ATM. I was simply Liam. I finally started living for myself. I invested in my own future. I learned to water my own fiddle leaf fig, I hiked mountains, and I cultivated friendships that were genuine, non-transactional, and built on mutual respect. If there is one thing I took away from the wreckage of the O'Connell family, it's this: your boundaries are the currency of your self-worth. I spent 15 years trying to earn love by giving away my financial and emotional capital. I confused dependability with obligation, and my family, seeing the limitless resource I presented, mistook it for a utility they could exploit. True family support is met with gratitude and effort. When help is met with demands, secrecy, and entitlement, you are not supporting, you are enabling a system that profits from your love. My parents' fear of a tax audit was manageable, but their fear of telling Chloe no was terminal. I only stepped in when I stopped being silent and started demanding accountability. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to accept that the family you needed doesn't exist, and the one you have is toxic. Cutting ties isn't giving up. It's choosing your own mental and financial health over a relationship that exists only to drain you. The moment I canceled those bills and replied with, "Learn to be independent," started my life over. I lost a house, I lost a title, but I gained my freedom. And that I realized was worth more than every dollar I had ever spent trying to buy a seat at a table that was never meant for me. Never let fear of confrontation keep you from protecting yourself. Be the hero of your own story, not the supporting character in someone else's drama.